All right, so when I was 20, I'd just come back from my very first research experience, hanging out in the Arctic, and I felt really smart coming back, but I had gained 15 pounds, so I wasn't feeling very sexy. And and I met this girl, Sarah, who was also a marine biology major and a year older than me. And I met her at our Unitarian group, and she kind of immediately thought I was awesome and took me under her dating wing. She was going to introduce me to some guys because I wasn't feeling so great about my game. And we start going to this coffee shop together, and she introduces me to this barista named Ian, who was, sounds so cliche, a writer who is 25, who'd been broken by New York City and had moved to Providence to work in a coffee shop while working on his novel. You know, but I was 20 and an idiot, so I was like, okay, this guy's pretty cool. So we start going on a few dates, and one of these dates, we end up, talking about our sexual histories, and I talk about, my hang-ups and stuff. And he proceeds to tell me this thing that's really bothering him, and that he had been in an accident, a sexually related accident where he'd broken his penis. And it happens. I don't have personal experience with it, but it happens. So he'd been suffering from some erectile dysfunction issues. And I was like, well, whatever. We'll just see what happens. So, we get to the sex part and we have it and it's great. He works, he's fixed. And my friend Bucky, who is studying to go to divinity school to be a Unitarian minister, he's like, you are the miracle worker. He's like, I will bring you into my congregation and say, she is the miracle worker. But, we sleep together once, and then he doesn't seem as interested in me, but we're still hanging out, and I'm 20, so I'm not very smart about what's going on here. But we're dating casually, and I say to him, because I'm trying to be, mature for my age, if you're seeing other people, just let me know. It's cool, but just, let me know. And so we kind of date on and off. And around the same time, I had introduced Sarah to my friend Frank, and they were kind of hitting it off, But Sarah had a lot of sexual history information that she was not telling Frank, and I could tell from talking to both of them. Frank was a good friend of mine. I was getting a little concerned, but didn't feel like it was my place. So New Year's Eve, I'm hanging out with Frank. I think we were just getting an early drink or something, and I was supposed to hang out with Ian later, coffee shop guy. And he somehow ends up telling me that apparently Ian's been dating other girls. But Sarah said not to tell me, because she was protecting my feelings. And I had a history of small people like her trying to control me. They went back to when I was 5 years old, when someone tried to convince me I was raised by squirrels before my parents found me. And I was had this immediate visceral reaction of what a bitch. So I was like, oh, well, I'm pissed at Ian, I'm pissed at Sarah. So then I tell Frank everything about Sarah's sexual history. Not my best move. But I was like, I'm defender of truth, right? So, I don't return Ian's calls, and I leave this angry note on his door New Year's Day that says, you just used me to get over your erectile dysfunction, which I've never written since. But then, so Frank and Sarah start talking, and they decide that, they're even closer now, which is great, right? The truth brings people closer together. But they decide that what I did was really, really wrong, which I admit, yes, it was. But what Sarah did was perfectly okay, because she was just protecting me, right? And so they were like, you need to redeem yourself. You need to apologize. But Sarah does not need to apologize. And I was like, no, that's not how friendships work. And so I cut myself off from Sarah. And then Frank decides to cut himself off from me. 8 years later, I get a Facebook message from Frank. He's like, hey, we need to talk. And I was like, okay. And he's like, as you may probably know, Sarah and I are getting married. And I was like, well, actually, I had no idea. Assuming I'm keeping up on their life. And he's like, I just wanted to say that things got really messed up back then. We were teenagers and we were all hormonal and shit. But you're a really good person, and I hope you've like gotten over it. And I was like, well, it really didn't like affect my, I've forgotten about this story actually. It really didn't affect my life, but I'm glad you guys are happy, and I hope you go on to make babies or something like that. And he's like, well, good. We should stay in touch. And I was like, all right, I get my friend Frank back. Thank you.